Welcome back to Borderline Genius. I'm one of your hosts, Kenton Grimes, and filling in for Anthony again is Rachel Marwood. Rachel, thank you again for joining us. It was a great conversation in our last show, and I'm looking forward to another one. Who did you bring with you today?
Absolutely. I brought John Esborn, and it is my pleasure to introduce John, who has been a longtime member of the Mohawk Global family before joining as our COO earlier this year. We're going to get into your background and all the interesting things and your expertise that you have to share, but I'll give a quick intro. Recognized as a builder and scale-up leader, John has launched and led multiple logistics startups, including a final mile delivery network, an air freight forwarder, 2 NVOCCs, and a parcel hub with more than 3,000 employees. John also serves on the board of Connect.org, lectures as a guest, and sits on the advisory board of Massachusetts Maritime Academy Business School. John, welcome to Borderline Genius.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Kenton.
Say that 3 times fast. Massachusetts Maritime.
Oh,
What?
I had to practice. Let's be real.
So you could say MMA, but people think MMA is like, something completely different.
Well, different. I mean, I've met you in person, John. I've seen those biceps. I could see you in MMA.
Yeah, not happening.
Oh, gosh. Well, we have a lot that we want to chat to you about. So what do you say? You guys ready?
I'm ready to go.
Fire away.
Let's do it. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get into the world of supply chain?
Quite by accident, honestly. It's kind of a story I like, but very much quite by accident. I was paying for my way through school at the University of Vermont because there were 3 other family members in college all at the same time, and one of my fellow RAs who lived locally and his dad owned a trucking company came home one day and said, "Hey, I got a part-time job in the afternoon. You want to do Tuesdays and Thursdays, driving the delivery route?" And hey, sure, I'm happy to do that. Let's try it out. And so kind of the rest is history. I didn't last long as a driver only because I kept banging into things. So that's why you go into management.
Oh.
So
your CDL, you don't still have it, huh?
No, that was well before CDLs existed, Kenton. There was no such thing as CDL when I got started. And I'm telling you, when the first time you've been in a big straight truck and you're going down state highways in Vermont that are narrow and winding, the first time I did that, it really freaked me out. So, but anyway.
That's good to hear, because as someone in the car who's gone on some of those highways, it freaks me out as well, seeing a truck coming. So we're all just making it work.
There you go.
Well, let's get into it. So from driving to management, let's fill that timeline in.
Very good. Well, ultimately, I ended up in an office. Really date myself. I worked for Emery Worldwide, a brand that doesn't exist anymore. It was purchased by UPS. But when I went into the office for Emery at the Burlington, Vermont airport, again, when I was still at UVM, my job was to load the cargo plane every night that would then take the freight on to another plane and through our hub in Dayton, Ohio. The cargo plane that I was loading is referred to as a C-47, or the commercial version is a DC-3. So look that one up on Google and see what that plane looked like. It was an old tail dragger. And that's what I loaded every night with freight. And the reason that they had me was because I was the young guy in college and they needed somebody to push the freight uphill because of the tail configuration. And they needed to get the freight up over the wheels so that the plane would actually take off. But anyway, from there, there was a gentleman from another defunct company, Airborne, that took me under his wing a little bit. We were doing their deliveries up in Vermont, and I would go down to Boston and call on him. And he brought me down to his office one day, and for a while, the sales manager there gave me a tour around the building. And as we were going through, he pointed out to some guys that were sitting at a dispatch table, and he said, "That's what I used to do over there." And he was the sales manager now. And I said to him, "Well, why would you not want to do that anymore?" And his answer was, "Because I would still be doing that for the rest of my life if I didn't become a sales manager." And it was the path to advancement in the logistics industry. And it pretty much, for the most part, is still to this day. And so ultimately, I didn't interview or, sign on or anything like that with Airborne, but I ended up with a company by the name of CF Fair Freight, who again bought Emery years later. But that brought me through a series of progressive opportunities from Burlington, Vermont, where I was a sales rep, grew the business. We opened an office, added some people. I got promoted over to Syracuse, New York, where I met my current boss, Gar Grinnell, because he was a sales rep for me coming out of Syracuse University. And then, so I was in Syracuse, and then again did well. And then when that happens, you go bigger. So then I ended up in Boston, and then went back into global sales because the CEO said, if you want to be to the next level, to everybody, all my peers, if you want to get to the next level, you need to have global sales experience. That brought me to Philadelphia. And that's where I took on that hub, parcel hub, that because Emery got a contract with the United States Postal Service. And we were moving 325,000 parcels a night through the building and the two biggest users or the two biggest volume shippers were QVC and this young startup company by the name of Amazon. And they were very small. When we first started, it was like 10,000 pieces of mail a night from packages from Amazon. And by the time I left a year later, it was like 70,000 a night. Wow. But that was really cool. I'm blessed with, and without, taking everybody through everything that, John did to the minutia, one of the themes was I've always been very curious. I think if you can maintain your curiosity in this business, you can be successful. Mm-hmm. And I'd never run a parcel hub before. When I was hired to do it, my boss at Emery was tapped to be the president of the thing. I said, I want in. He said, okay, you can have Philadelphia. I'd worked for him quite a bit, done a great job for him. I think I could say, because he kept hiring me back or promoting me. And so the extent of my interview was, oh, you can have Philadelphia, because we were in Philly at the time. And it was a dirt lot. It wasn't even building wasn't built yet. And so we had to learn everything there was about, how to sort parcels and whatnot in the building. And so we started from scratch. We hired 600 people, and then it said 3,000 because we went and got another 2,500 seasonal employees, that we would get. There were two things that I took away from that role as you learn. And, I talked about curiosity. I think that translates to, I hope I'm always learning right up to the last day that I work. And who knows, maybe even after I retire, I'm still learning about logistics and calling people up and bugging them and saying, have you thought about this? You need to try this. But one was the importance of connecting with the people. Mm. I would walk through that building, and it was kind of a challenge. And I don't think I accomplished this because at any one point in time, there were 200 mail sorters in the building. I always, in theory, wanted to know something about each one of them, just something. The kids were playing ball. They went on a vacation to Disneyland. Whatever it might be about them. They just got an EMT certification. Whatever it might be. And or stop with them and what their task was and ask them about it and understand what their challenges were and what they were dealing with, so that I could empathize, a little bit better, even sometimes touching the mail and doing it alongside them, so I could go, yeah, this is miserable, but let's see if we can do it differently. Right. So that was really important. The other thing that I learned was sticking with your convictions. I'm not sure if that's the right way to put it. It was Christmas. So we would literally at Christmas, I mentioned we'd get 2,500 seasonal workers. But on top of that, we'd go get a whole nother building. Like, you call a realtor up and say, hey, I need about a 300,000 square foot building. What do you got? They'd go, oh, great. You want a 5-year lease? I said, no, I only want it for 3 months. And so you move in and you move out. And so they bought all this new equipment. I mean, we had some process engineers that really weren't out in the operations. They were doing it from an office in Portland, Oregon. And so they bought all this new shiny equipment that was supposed to help us. We ended up shoving that all under the sorters that we had. We had high-speed sorters out of the way because it was of no value to us. And I said to a vice president that came through, because we were processing the mail so fast. I mean, we couldn't clear it out of the building fast enough. We were processing it so fast. And so like there's this sea of mail and all these people that are trying to get through the building, and we're trying to fill line hauls out for specific destinations. And finally I knew there was a building next door. It was 50,000 square feet. It was empty. And I said to this vice president, I need that building because I'm going to take the processed mail and just shove it in the trailers, take it over to that other building. And that's where we would set out the individual line haul trucks to St. Louis or Raleigh, Durham, et cetera. Right. And, and that way we could clear the building out because the building was not big enough. And he said, no, he said, we bought all this equipment and all this stuff. I'm like, I need that building. And finally he said, okay, you can get the building, but it's on you if it fails. I'm like, fine, I'll take it. And it was a huge success, and kind of the icing on the cake, or however you want to put it, was the next year the 4 largest buildings all had a third facility to bleed off the processed mail to.
Fantastic.
So, convictions, right? I knew it was right. I just knew that would work. And again, through my curiosity, I really understood how the building worked and the mail flowed and how it all happened and what we needed. And so between that and trying to know your people, those were probably 2 takeaways. And I like to think I take takeaways from everything I've done. I've done a lot of different things. And at the end of that Christmas season, I mean, it was brutal. Literally, I have nothing but respect for the people that are in hubs at the holiday season. And I was coming up on my 15th year in March, and I just said, you know what? I'm done. Which was a strange thing because I come from a culture, look at my generation, my age, guys my age, our dads all were World War II guys who their badge of honor was, I worked for this company for 30 years. I worked for this company for 35 years, whatever. Right. And so when you grow up in that culture, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm leaving, after 15 years, I'm leaving. I shouldn't, be leaving, but, it was the best thing that I ever did, quite frankly. We moved back because our family's from Connecticut. We moved back to New England, and that's where I got the opportunity to start a final mile delivery network for furniture.com, the original furniture home goods company. And we covered Chicago to DC for them. And it was about 100 deliveries a day. And maybe it was more than that, but at the beginning, and then they went bankrupt. And again, curiosity being what it was, I wrote in Microsoft Access a whole tracking and tracing program that they could get the updates on their shipments and where they were. And we did a great job for them. They went bankrupt. And that's when I went to to Conway Air, and we started another company. And I started in Boston and ultimately ended up as the director of operations, the chief operating officer there. And gosh, it's been every couple of years ever since. It feels like I'm doing something different. But here's the thing. I when I feared that, I look back at when I was with Emory, CF Air Freight and Emory for 15 years, and you know what? I looked at that. I was getting promoted every 18 months to 2.5 years anyway. So how is that any different than kind of changing companies or whatever, right? So hubs and final mile delivery networks and air freight companies, and I don't know, a few other stops in between, and then I think probably the really cool one was being given the opportunity to start Castlegate Global Logistics, now known as Castlegate Freight Forwarding, for Wayfair. And it was crazy, but I knew so interviewing with Wayfair is tough. Either that or they really don't want me, but being the salesperson I was all my career, I just wouldn't go away, right? Like if you're ever in sales and logistics, the survivors are the ones that are a real thorn. I had 5 phone interviews. Okay, they brought me in. I had 4 interviews with 5 people. And then a month later, they brought me back and I interviewed with the CEO, co-founder, Neeraj Shah, who's a wonderful guy. And then, a month later, they brought me back again and I had 4 more interviews. And one of the things that Wayfair does is everybody has to do a case study that they literally kind of describe to you in the meeting, and apparently I nailed it. But then I should have, because it was all about warehousing and where you would put your inventory, kind of geographically, what was the optimized situation. And at that point, if I couldn't answer that, then I didn't deserve the job. But what I explained to Raj was, Wayfair is a marketplace. They don't own anything. And so you needed to become an NVOCC. And I had the opportunity to do that, sit down and explain it to him, and then be given the keys to the car. And so I was kind of the first employee in, applied for the NVOCC license, got my name on the license. So that was, in the first 6 months. And then we at that point, Wayfair was still moving some of their own containers. And so we got practice on that, and ultimately grew it. So we handled our first container as an NVOCC in January of 2018. And by the time I left in September of 2020, 2021, excuse me, we had grown to 60,000 containers. And I was signing billion-dollar contracts and stuff like that. And I'm like, and I was still only a director in the company, because that's just not the Wayfair's way, which is fine. But I was sitting there though, thinking to myself, the college graduate version of John Esborn would probably sit there thinking to himself, what would be cool by the time I get to the end of my career? And if nothing else, if I was like negotiating contracts of that magnitude, it'd be like, hey man, this is pretty cool.
For sure.
And I was, and I'd like to think I was pretty good at it. And that was because I came from the freight forwarder side, and I knew where everybody tucked their extra $20 in their sock and hid it in their pants. And I'm like, no, you're not charging me for that stuff, right? So, so one of the cool, so not only that, but again, being curious and being creative, there were a couple things. One was, so we were an NVOCC, but we were owned by or within Wayfair. And all the goods we were bringing in were for selling on Wayfair. And so as far as I was concerned, we were a BCO. And if you know the freight industry, beneficial cargo owner, and the ocean carriers have a completely different relationship with beneficial cargo owners than they do with NVOCCs. And but I was like, look, our main competitors are Walmart, Target, Home Depot. They're selling the same stuff we're selling, and you need to treat us as a BCO. Oh, no, you're not a BCO. You're an NVO. I said, we're a BCO. I tell you, everything we're going to move in the containers are for people selling those goods in our marketplace, on our marketplace. And there were two gentlemen from Mohawk, who are now my peers, Mike Kuhn and Rich Roach, who said, you'll never get that done. Well, guess what? If you don't ask, you don't get it. And I was able to convince enough carriers, a handful, 5-6 carriers, that they should treat us like a BCO and give us BCO type contracts, because we weren't out there to just like go into the open market. It was not the goal. And on top of it, knowing what gave the carriers angst, like, booking like the typical kind of NVO behavior, which is, oh, I just got $100 less container, and let's cancel that booking, and we'll take this one over here. And then the next day it's like, oh, I got another $100 less. Let's cancel the booking and move. I said, this is about loyalty, credibility, honesty. I was always transparent with the carriers. I built some really great relationships that I think are, good friendships now. And because the integrity of what we were doing, myself, but more so the integrity of what we were doing was paramount to the success of the program. And it worked. And we went from one container in January of 2018 to 50, 60,000, whatever it was, containers. And by September, that was the pace. We were on that pace by September 2021. And my org by the time I left was like 34 people or something like that. And anyway, it was pretty cool launching that. And of course, we had everybody's attention, and I was everybody's new best friend. Very much aware that if I should ever leave or we didn't have that volume anymore, I would not be anybody's best friend ever again, because that's just the way that it works. But we were ultimately moving goods into the U.S., into Canada, into the U.K., into Germany, and out of Asia, Southeast Asia, India, Turkey, which is still Asia. And it was very cool putting that whole network together. If there was anything we struggled from, it wasn't Wayfair's way necessarily. You know, they hired really brilliant people, really truly brilliant people, MBAs from Harvard or MIT with master's degrees, and there just wasn't enough room for all those people to be brilliant. And so we had a lot of turnover. You know, guys came in and they wanted to have an impact, and I would too if I had that kind of an education, right? I mean, I have my PhD in freight, right? But you know, and so I spent constant time teaching people what ocean freight was and what we could do. And so then they would go, oh, well, let's do this. And I'm like, you know, let's go open up shipments from Thailand. Okay, hang on. New country, new laws. Let's slow down for a second. Let's find out if we can issue our own bill of lading or if we need to be licensed or registered in that country. And so it was fun to do, even going through that discovery process with all the different countries and how countries differed, and therefore the opportunities it created for you, you know, as well. And so it was really a wonderful education to be able to do that. And I worked with one broker, and the broker was Mohawk, and there was a reason for that. Because I know Gar Grinnell, who owns Mohawk, I had a unique opportunity to really know his company inside, not as a customer and not as an employee, but more as a friend. And you know, because of that relationship, the doors were open to me to learn about the company and his passions and his desires and what he wanted. And you know, there are more Mohawks out there. Don't get me wrong, but I knew I had one, and the other option would be go find another Mohawk and go through all the testing and suffering and pain that you can go through to realize, nope, that's not one of them. Let's get rid of that one. Let's try the next one, right? And that's just the reality. And so I wanted one broker because, again, remember, we didn't own the goods, you know, and so everybody was their own importer. But if you know the business, can you imagine? We had 383 when I left, different suppliers that were using the program. And how many brokers would that mean in terms of customs brokers? I mean, there's going to be some using the same broker. Let's just say it's 127 different customs brokers, right? Can you imagine trying to get 127 different customs brokers to turn left or turn right at the stop sign? And then all the finger pointing. Well, we didn't get the arrival notice from you, or you didn't send me that email you were supposed to, and now you're like this with detention and demurrage, right? And so we insisted that the suppliers use Mohawk if they were going to use our ocean program. Now, what was the motivation for them? And this was the beauty of it. What was the motivation for them to use the program? It was that they could get predictable pricing. They were small businessmen, and they're trying to know in March, what's my container cost going to look like in October? And they're trying to build product pricing and whatnot. And why take on that risk if you don't have to? So it wasn't a profit center. It was a break-even center where we could protect the supply chain for us to make sure the goods were where they needed to be, but also we could protect the pricing for the suppliers so that our wholesale costs didn't go up, right? Same thing that Amazon does to a large extent, because they have interestingly enough, when I went over to Wayfair to start Castlegate, the former CEO, I had come from UTI. I had been let go. We were bought out by DSV. Well, the CEO and one of the VPs over there also ended up over at Amazon building out Amazon Global Logistics. Now, I happen to think I did a better job at it at Wayfair than anyway. And so the beauty of it was we could protect our supply chain, make sure we had goods to sell on the platform. We had one broker partner to work with, and we could, even though we weren't the ones paying the bills and ultimately picking the broker, we could control. From my chair at Castlegate, we could control Mohawk. What does that mean? Well, we had certain KPIs that they had to hit, and they're still the same KPIs today since 2018. And so we really could control the quality and the performance of the service. And I always thought for Mohawk, the benefit for them would be they would get more business from many of the importers than they have, because Mohawk does a very good job. And it's not a sales pitch; it's just reality. And so that was a very that really worked well. How well did it work? Well, one, you got one entity doing all the brokerage. Two, when you start shipping goods into Canada that came into the United States and you want to do duty drawback, well, the duty drawback documents are all with one broker. Again, can you imagine going to go to 127 different brokers to say, "Could you send me these documents? I need to apply for drawback," right? And so just from my background and my experience, those were fun things that were evident to me, that honestly, if I was just another, I don't mean to be disrespectful, because I worked with some brilliant people, but somebody with an MIT or Harvard just wouldn't. You have to walk in the space. It's not like I'm the only guy that come up with these things.
Mhm.
Yeah, but you have to have walked in the space and paid attention in your career and been curious, right? And build relationships. Like I said, trust with the carriers, the ocean carriers, and whatnot. So, boy, that was kind of a long thing.
I love it.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I know Kenton has some follow-up questions.
Oh,
Sorry.
There's
Sorry.
so many questions going on in my mind. One is, I want to go back, and I don't think we should, but I want to go back to you hauling the freight up the tail of the plane. I mean, it goes back to the MMA comment earlier. I can just see those quads. John's like just
there were no
ripped.
quads.
Just see John at 20 ripped, just Herculean efforts up the tail of that plane.
It was fun. That was an old plane, man. World War II era plane. This was back in 1980. So it was fun.
Good year. So looking, there's so many practical and just very technical things that we could look at, from sorting mail and packages to the massive pivot to online ordering, fulfillment of furniture, right? We're talking quantities, sizes, such a difference. But I'm curious, you highlighted a lot of comments about knowing your staff, knowing the team, and building processes. So I really want to dive into the leadership. I don't think we as a channel have really explored the leadership aspect within the supply chain and logistics world. So I'm curious your take on how you've been able to, what you have done primarily, but then how did it parlay into successes?
The journey of learning the logistics, all these different things I did is extremely exciting and a lot of fun, quite frankly. The journey of becoming a better manager and leader, I think maybe it's because I'm older and nearer to the end of my career or whatever, but I think that's equally exciting and enjoyable, quite frankly. I was a pretty crappy manager when I was young and 28, 29 years old, and, pushing people and, you got to get that done. And I don't care, you got to work late tonight. And, just not probably a good manager at all. Right. And, however, over time, things just become evident. It's hard to say. It's like I think probably one of the first things was I started to go, I would be frustrated maybe with a boss or something. And I'm like, and I would start to realize, well, wait a second, when you're, when you see something kind of similar to what you went through, you're like, well, why would they feel any differently and frustrated with me as a boss or whomever than I did with my boss if I'm putting them through the same thing? You start to like put yourself in their shoes a little bit and go, yeah, okay, I get it, you spend more time. I really think, honestly, and they were different things. There were different things. So, because I'm going to say, Wayfair was probably my first real opportunity to do better. When I was with Emory and I ended up in Boston, they were all union guys, and I actually like managing in a union environment because the rules are there, and makes your supervisors be better supervisors. It gets rid of the subjective aspect of managing people, but it was also difficult. In ways as well. You couldn't establish a relationship as well with them as much as you might want to. I literally had a guy tell me a union steward when we went out and bought everybody lunch. I said, hey, Bob, that wasn't his name. Hey, Bob, why don't you go in and have some pizza? We got pizza for everybody today. And his answer to me was, I don't eat with the enemy. And he was an employee and his paycheck was coming from Emory. But, as far as he was concerned, he worked for union, but he worked for the union. And I get it, right? And you get to those kind of situations for a reason, and so it's as much on the employer's faults as it is anything else. But here's the interesting thing with this gentleman, and I'm not really answering your question, but just different experiences that mold you. If I had to go to somebody with a really critical shipment that I knew was going to be taken care of, followed up on, and everything would go perfectly for, that was the guy that I would go to. The steward who wouldn't eat with the enemy. So that was very interesting. I guess if anything, you have to be kind of a chameleon as you go to different places and learn how to manage people. But I guess it was the postal hub. I said Wayfair, but it was the postal hub that really made me start to, again, as I mentioned already, not to be redundant, but I just wanted to know something about everybody. We're all there working. We're trying to get stuff done. Let me tell you, Christmas time in those sort hubs, it's ugly. It's ugly. And so you can watch people really work hard for you, and you can be sincere in your thanks and your appreciation to them. And so that was kind of an important step for me. I kind of think I'm probably a slow learner because probably other people would have learned this a lot faster than me, but I get there eventually. Don't worry, I'll get there eventually.
So was the holiday hub and the rush what influenced your desire to become Santa?
No, not at all. Not at all. That was just something at Wayfair, and I did it as a joke. We have this beautiful Santa suit that my wife made years ago, and I've always Santa for her family, which she comes from a really big beautiful Italian family, and so I had it. I wore it, the beard and the hat one time to Wayfair. And I don't know, somehow it morphed. I can't even tell you, Rachel, how we ended up doing it. But during COVID, we did virtual Santa, and I had two elves. I got two volunteers who were elves, and they were great. And we just had a blast. I mean, it was just a blast. And we had a spreadsheet set up, and people would come in and sign up for a 10-minute block, and they'd tell us the kids' names, something nice that they did recently, and then what they wanted for Christmas that they were already had been bought for them for Christmas, right? And so we're like, Susie, I understand you helped your mommy with your brother Danny, and that was so nice, and you want a American Girl doll or whatever for Christmas, I guess. I'm going to do my best to get that for you. And in one case, they had sent a letter to Santa the night before, and I said, I got your letter. So they let me know, that the letter was sent. I said, I got your letter. Thank you so much. And yes, I'll do everything I can to get whatever it was, for you. And it just the way the kids, I mean, that particular child jumped around all over the house afterwards, telling her mom and dad she couldn't wait to go to school to tell everybody she met the real Santa, because I got her letter, so it's just, the kids are beautiful and they're fun and it was wonderful. And so it just morphed. And I hope to do it at Mohawk. I hope to do it virtually at Mohawk.
We should have a
honestly, it's more
Q&A.
fun virtually than doing it in person.
We should have everyone who's listening to the show have put their children's requests in, have another episode with you on it, and then you're going, oh, we'd really like to get this American Girl doll made in Malaysia. Unfortunately, the IEPA tariffs are an additional 20% for you out there, so mom and dad's got to pay a little bit extra on this one.
Well, we could have a border genius with Santa.
Hey, although I think that elf would be a lot less fun.
But so that's how that grew. But the other thing that I did at Wayfair, so my dad's parents came from Sweden, and my grandmother makes Swedish coffee bread, Swedish cardamom coffee bread. And when I was a kid growing up, I'd go up. They lived just up the street from us, and I'd go in the kitchen. There'd always be a loaf of dough rising, and my grandmother was always making a loaf of that. Well, she taught my dad. My dad taught my brother and I. My brother and I have taught our children. But one year, I made 66 loaves, and there's 2 loaves in a batch. And if you look at your largest laptop screen, that's how big one loaf is, right? Wow. And I made 66 loaves. I brought them into Wayfair, and I gave everybody in my organization a loaf of Swedish coffee bread. And when I was with Overstock Beyond, I went out there, brought an extra roller board because I had 10 loaves of Swedish coffee bread in it when I went out there for Christmas holiday. It's just my thing. I love to do it. It's the only thing I bake. And it tastes awesome, by the way. And so those are things. And so I have so I don't know how we're doing on time here, but I have when I really got better at being a leader, I think, at Castlegate and Wayfair. I mean, we scaled so rapidly, and but it was the people around me that I watched how they led that I learned from. And I tell people I never had a really good original idea myself, but I steal some great ideas from other people. And so, we had one gentleman who had a spreadsheet that had a whole process where you went from what a person's goals were, not just career goals, to what the next tab was, how they did, how their role right then at Wayfair applied to that, and how they were performing. And then that's against, their job and their review period. But then it went down to what are the projects they're working on, and then what kind of extra education are they doing, or other organizations. It was a beautiful thing. And everybody in my organization had to have one. And so the reason I mentioned that is that was as important as anything. And when I left Castlegate, one of the I hesitate to share this only because it sounds arrogant, pompous, whatever. But I left there, and one of my employees made this book. And in it are 72 notes from people to me about being their leader, and they'll talk about Santa. They talk about the coffee bread, but they also talk about the one-on-ones that we had, because I had them with everybody in my organization, had a half an hour one-on-one every month, which when you have 32 people in your org is a significant commitment as a leader. And we often spent time talking about them. Just them. One young woman was not doing what she wanted to do. This is not what I studied. And I said, hang in here with us, because we're going to teach you great job skills that will apply to anywhere in your life. How to run meetings, set agendas, do all that stuff. But we're going to get you to where you want to be. And she wanted to go back to grad school for hospitality. That was her undergrad degree. And about 9 months into working for us, I started saying, so have you thought about grad school? You applied to grad school. And I'm very proud to say that she's got her master's degree from NYU in hospitality now. If I had any part to do with it, it was just keeping her like, hey, you're going to do this, right?
I think we have so much more we need to get into, and more to discuss. So let's regroup for a part 2 of this conversation. How does that sound to you guys?
Love it.
If,
Awesome.
if
All
you'd
right.
like. If you'd
Yes,
like.
please.